All right, hi guys. My name is Ryan Blair. I'm a Master's of Landscape Architecture student. I'm in the brainstorming phase of my thesis. What exactly will my question be? What do I want to exactly focus on next year? But I do have some ideas, and this is one of them. One thing I do know is in the past few years, I've really gained an interest in planning, regional and community planning, and that follows my background in economics. So planning is kind of the intersection between landscape architecture and economics. So that's kind of why it interests me. I've also gained a lot of inspiration from some of the projects we worked in LARC 351 or LARC 350 and 351, which for me have are LARC 650 and 651 respectively. And then some of the success stories that are currently in West Virginia, some of these small towns actually have capitalized on their opportunities, but unfortunately, majority have not. I always see these articles on top 10 places to retire or top 10 places for a weekend getaway. And I think of the opportunity for some of these smaller towns, especially the ones we've visited in the past year through the courses I've taken. So here's an idea. So I came across this article once I started researching some things. It's called Mapping Where History and Opportunity Meet through the Preservation Leadership Forum. So this is kind of an online blog for preservationists and historians. So what this article is about, so let's go back, let's say 3 years, back to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, where something called opportunity zones was introduced. So opportunity zones, I'm not an expert on them, but it's a tax credit for distressed areas. And to explain things a little bit clearer, I'll show you a video. It's a short video and explains things pretty quickly and concisely.
Well, when you think of it in terms of a typical experiencing capital gains is a great thing, but the way that capital gains are taxed can be a bit overwhelming. Did you know there's a way to defer, reduce, and even pay zero on the capital gains tax? Created as a result of a bipartisan legislation included in the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, Opportunity zones offer specific federal tax incentives designed to promote long-term investment in designated developing neighborhoods across the country. Basically, it's a new way to connect private capital into communities with untapped potential across America in a way that will benefit both parties. So, what does it mean for the investor specifically? Well, when you think of it in terms of a typical portfolio, it means you can potentially double your after-tax profits. How? The triple threat. By investing into one of these opportunity zones, you can defer your capital gains tax to the year 2026. Once those taxes are due, they are reduced by 15%. And if you hold the investment in the fund for 10 years, you eliminate tax on any profits you received from the fund. The extensive tax benefits and chance to make a difference speak for themselves. Opportunity zones are good for the investor and great for the community. To learn more about investing opportunity zones, visit urbancatalyst.com.
So that gives a little bit better of a description of what the opportunity zone portion of the act is, better description than I would probably give. But what this article really talked about essentially was an overlap. So an overlap between opportunity zones and historic districts, which is really interesting because there's a lot of community members that might be interested because there's certain planners that might be looking to capitalize on the opportunity zone incentive as well as the historic tax credit incentive. How does that work? Is there any limitations to that? Is there any issues with that? And the reason that's important, the reason this whole thing is important is because for the broad picture is you could have a million ideas on how to, correct or plan some of these towns and whatnot, but essentially you need money for that. And money comes from loans, grants, and private investment. And this specifically is looking at private investment, which, if I had to guess, is one of the hardest ways to get money in West Virginia. Most of West Virginia, most of the projects that go on in West Virginia are usually grant and loan based. So looking into it even further, so this quote comes straight from the article. It says, a year and a half after the creation of the incentive, it appears opportunity zones have yet to catalyze the amount of reinvestment originally envisioned, as investors in financial markets have sought more clarity about how the incentive would work. So a lot of these community planners, they know about the opportunity zone portion of the act, but they really don't know how it works. And they especially don't know how it overlaps with historic tax credits or any other tax credits or financial incentives. So a lot of people are trying to clear things up, and if there's any way to clear it up even better, that's another opportunity to jump onto. I'm going to go into the app in just a second. So there's an actual virtual ArcGIS online map that shows you these overlap portions or these overlap regions. But just to go into a little deeper, so the mapping application is designed to help preservation community understand where historic buildings benefit or might be at risk for demolition or inappropriate incentivized redevelopment. So these aren't only historic buildings, but just historic regions. Places that are on the National Register of Historic Places. We all know those aren't just all buildings. But it states that it is imperative that the preservation community join efforts to ensure that historic properties are protected on the one hand and positioned for rehabilitation on the other. So not only should they be protected, so this place doesn't incentivize demolition and rebuilding, which is not what we want in West Virginia because of the rich history. The opportunity that lies in the rich history of West Virginia is probably the biggest. And then it also notes that this application only includes National Register of Historic District boundaries for states and locations where accurate information is currently available. And lack of data in certain parts of the country don't imply that there aren't historic districts or data. It just means the data is not there. So that might be a limitation in West Virginia. So maybe updating that could be a task. So let's go look at this tool real quick. So it's an ArcGIS online tool. They have these things for pretty much everything. They even have it for the current coronavirus outbreak as far as hotspots. Where is there cases, where is there not? So the first thing I pick up on is I'm kind of surprised how little. So what you see in blue are opportunity zones, so places that fall under the criteria through the 2017 Act. And I do see West Virginia has a lower amount of opportunity zones than I expected. We all know this is the most distressed. Let me draw something real quick. So this is, of course, the heart of Appalachia. It's one of the most distressed portions of the country. West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, stretching all the way down into Mississippi and Alabama. But as far as the context of all states, West Virginia has a fairly low number of opportunity zones. Obviously, southern West Virginia takes the cake, but not even specifically clustered where I'd expect them to, which would be down in the coal fields, Wyoming County, McDowell County, Kentucky border counties, but they're kind of sparsely located. But let's just go look at some of the towns that might fall under this category where you have an overlap. So you can turn on specific layers. So I can turn on National Main Street programs, which I'll actually get to in a second. And then Federal Historic Preservation Tax Credit projects. So historic tax credit projects. Let's see where there's some overlap. So let me just pick a town. So Hinton, West Virginia. Let's start with Hinton. So Hinton actually has some overlap, as you can see. Hinton has some overlap with, first of all, qualified opportunity zones. So that's a newer thing. It's also on the National Register for Historic Places, and it has numerous federal historic preservation tax credit projects. So those are the blue dots, and you can actually click on those and see what they are. The Ritz Theater. So these have a threefold opportunity. So this is kind of the areas that this article was talking about. So areas that fall under the historic tax credit opportunity and the Opportunity Zone Act for private investment. This article talks about how there's some areas that have no overlap. So Orlando, Florida. All three fall within the Orlando, Florida metropolitan area, but there's absolutely zero overlap other than this small overlap right here. And then some areas like St. Louis have, a ridiculous amount of overlap and opportunity. So I just wanted to share that. It's a pretty interesting article. It kind of gets us what we're talking about. So where you could do an advanced GIS spatial analysis project on this is you could do a suitability analysis using the data we just looked at. So a suitability analysis with criteria including opportunity zone areas, historic tax credit locations or National Register of Historic Places, places that might fall under the Main Street America program, but also including some other criteria, and that's where you can kind of customize this. You can include trail connections, which I'll talk about in the next slide, distance to airports or highways, existing lodging, outdoor amenities. Do they fall under the Brownfields Assistance Center program? Is there a money opportunity for that? This could even include writing a Python script for a GIS program. You can actually write Python scripts to create your own custom GIS tool. It's actually something I did in a class last semester. So this tool could then be given to community members. They could run it, or they could run the tool for their county, and the final output would be areas that have the most opportunity where there's a lot of overlap for those three criteria and any other criteria you deem important. You could even do a preference weighting and a survey to see which ones community members think are most important, whether it's trail connections, lodging, or outdoor amenities. So Main Street America is a national program that funds, downtown, small downtown or large downtown areas, so projects, and they definitely capitalize on historic tax credit projects. There's a lot of East Coast projects that are currently underway, especially some in West Virginia. So Wheeling, West Virginia has actually recently won an award for their Main Street America projects. But they also talk about this thing called trail towns. So in this graphic here, you can see that Allegheny Passage, which goes from Pittsburgh all the way to DC using some trail networks and then eventually C&O towpath. So another opportunity on top of the Opportunity Zone Act would be some of the Main Street America programs, including trail towns. And we all know West Virginia has a plethora of trail towns or towns that have an opportunity to be a trail town. And Main Street's role could be even more leveraging investors using these concepts to push for using the Opportunity Zones Act, Historic Tax Credit Act, and then also working with Main Street America. So some questions we can ask are, do most small towns in West Virginia actually know how the opportunity zones work, or those tax incentives? What towns in West Virginia have the most potential, or what regions? Some have larger regions, including the geopark. How do we protect historic places in West Virginia through opportunity zones? So remember, there's a risk of places getting demolished through this because there might be some bugs in the specific writing of the act. So that's kind of where I'm at. It was kind of a case study I looked at. The article kind of gave me some inspiration to delve a little bit deeper into it. So I appreciate everybody's time.